Morning, everyone. Okay, so I think we're ready to go. This is the current edition, November's edition of Housing Policy Committee, brought to you from Sheffield Town Hall. So we've got today 8 members of the committee here. We've got various people in the room, and we've got people online. So just a welcome, first of all. First of all, we go round introductions in a moment, but before that, just the usual housekeeping. So first of all, thanks to everyone for attending, both on the committee and otherwise. Please put your phones off and laptops and things, or put them onto silent. As usual, no fire drill today, so if the alarms go off, we have to get out and go to Tudor Square, but basically follow all the people out of the building. And we've got a couple of exempt items that contain confidential information which we'll have to deal with. So I'll maybe come back to that, but maybe for the record we could go round and get our introductions on the record. So just to start that off, I'm Councillor Douglas Johnson, I'm the chair of the committee, and I'm Councillor for City Ward. So I'll go round, starting with Councillor Haby.
Malachi Haby, Councillor for Bromhill and Sharrowvale.
Councillor Sophie Thornton, Councillor for Beechif and Greenhill.
Councillor Sue Auckland, Councillor for Grace Park Ward.
Councillor Cliff Woodcraft, I'm substituting for Penny Baker and I represent Fulwood.
Councillor Ben Curran, a councillor for Walkley.
Councillor Denise Fox, Councillor for Burley.
From Belbin, Councillor for Firth Park.
Thank you, everyone. So that's the introduction. So on apologies on item 2 formally. So Cliff's already noted that Councillor Baker's given apologies and we have Councillor Woodcraft substituting, and we also have apologies from Councillor Wood who can't be here. So and if I understand he's got COVID, then I think we should probably all send him best wishes. I wonder if you could pass it on. Thanks. Good, okay. So on item 3, we've got the exclusion of press and public, which I mentioned. So I just wanted to see if the committee agrees that we can deal with the confidential items, which are the appendices to items 9 and 10, which is the difficult budget stuff. So the reports for 9 and 10 are open and public, and we should have all had those now, even though they came late. The appendices contain a bit more detail that's still confidential because it involves people's jobs and livelihoods, and whilst no firm decision's been made on that, it's right that we treat everyone with the sensitivity that's due, because it's a difficult time for everyone in the council. So what I'm proposing is that we deal with items 9 and 10 at the end of the agenda, so after we've done items 14 and 15, which are on finance but are open. And if so, then we'll have to, I'm suggesting that we ask Ryan Keyworth to introduce those 2 items on the open part, and then we'll have to turn the cameras off and ask the public to leave whilst we have any discussion on the closed parts. And then, as pointed out, we have to formally vote on those papers, so we'll have to reopen that to the public and the webcast in order to have the vote on record. So that's what I'm proposing, which I think is workable. Is everyone happy with that suggestion? Yeah, okay. Well, let's go through in that order then. If so, we're now on to item 4, which is declarations of interest. So quick rip round. Does anyone have any declarations of interest to flag up? Not expecting on. Okay, so no declarations of interest. Next, item 5 is the minutes of the previous meeting. So they're starting on page 11. So I just want to check, first of all, whether they can be approved as an accurate record. Does anyone want to flag up any inaccuracies? I'll take that as no. Can I just have a quick show of hands to show that the record of those is approved? Everyone happy with that? Anyone unhappy? Right, okay. Take that as approved. I think we should have matters arising, partly because I want to raise one. Query to officers. This is probably my fault. On page 11, we've got item 4.1.2, which is a matter arising from last time. And Councillor Fox quite rightly asked whether we'd actually had responses to two members of the public who came and asked questions in an earlier meeting. And I'm still not sure that I've actually done those. Do you know, Rachel? If the answer is no, just say no.
Yes, I do. I'm good. I've spoke with Councillor Fox. We emailed, didn't we, Councillor Fox, about this? Yes, those have been followed up, and I do believe that the responses would find the way into the minutes. If they don't, then they will be published as a supplementary item so that the public are aware of those responses. So they have found the way into the minutes, hopefully.
Right, that's good news. That sounds like they've been dealt with. Can I just check that Emily Proctor and Jeff Cox have received those responses? Yeah.
I'm not sure if they've been sent directly to Emily and Jeff. I think that they have, with finding the way into the minutes or a supplementary item, then Emily or Jeff can view them on the website.
Okay. All right. Let's just check this afterwards, and maybe we can, just for the record, we could get the text of those answers, whatever they were, put into the minutes of this meeting, so that we know we're definitely on here somewhere. Would
I
that
can
be
do
okay?
that, no problem, yeah.
Yeah. Ben?
Sorry, just to follow up on that, because I think if someone comes to the committee and asks a question, that they should get and they're getting a follow-up response, surely that should come from the chair. So it's a concern to me the chair doesn't know if the response has been sent out, and then an officer saying she thinks it has. So just as, I guess, a point for future, making sure that the chair's linked in so that the response comes from the chair.
Absolutely right, and that's why I flagged it up as something I want to raise the matter arising, because I genuinely can't remember whether I know the response has been sent out or not. So I'm saying this is partly my fault, but I just didn't want to let it slide, given that it's quite rightly been raised before. So, okay, we'll just need to round that off before the next meeting.
Chair,
yes.
can I just
Do.
come in? Sorry, just to ask, because I don't, when were these questions put? What's the time delay in getting back to these people?
June's meeting.
Was it the June meeting? I'm just being told it was the June meeting.
Yeah.
And we're now in November.
Yes, so they originally asked the questions at the June meeting, and I recall that we answered both of them directly, orally, in the meeting. There was some further follow-up, or it might have been written confirmation. I genuinely can't remember now, but we just need to often just make sure that they've had whatever we promised them, that they've had that.
Well, I hope there's going to be some sort of fulsome apology for such a very lengthy delay when people take the trouble to come.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's right if they've not had that. But as I say, I know they did have the response at the committee meeting. Okay, let's get to the bottom of that. Thanks. So that was actually dealing with matters arising. Do we have anything else arising from the last minutes, or shall we move on? Anyone flagging anything? No, right, okay. Well, we've just agreed to approve those, so that's that item done. So we've gone to the public questions and petitions. So I just want to check where we are. So, Rachel, have we got any petitions or any public questions?
Thank you, Chair. I'm not aware of any petitions. There is a set of public questions that were submitted by Jenny Fortune, but Jenny isn't here. Oh, Jenny is here. She's over there. So we have questions 1 to 4. I do believe they're the ones that you've got in front of you, Chair, so
Right.
I'll pass back to you.
Thank you. Right, yes, okay. I did see you come in, and we weren't too sure where you were. Thank you for coming, Jenny. So with your questions, we've got your 4 written questions here, and I've got a note about some answers I can give to you. Would you like to come and read them out for the record? It's up to you. Okay, I don't mean to put you on the spot. They're your questions. You're entitled to come and ask them, so you can ask them in your own voice. If you want me to read them out, I can do that, or I can just give you answers, because you know what the questions are. If you'd like to read them out, would you like to come to a microphone so that you can be picked up for the recording that's being broadcast? Thank you. And then...
Okay, I'm a member of Gleadus Valley Labour Party branch. I also work with groups of women who live on Gleadus Valley estate, running conversation classes with them. So through that, and also my background as a council architect in the past, I'm very interested in what the provisions are under the Gleadus Valley Master Plan and the progress of the Master Plan. So my questions are, is the full amount of £90 million budgeted for the Gleadus Valley refurbishment secured now? If not, how much exactly has been secured and what are the plans for securing the rest of the 90 million? That's question 1. Question 2, which council officer lead and department in the council is in charge of the refurbishment of the existing housing? That's question 2. Question 3, what steps have been taken to establish a training and apprenticeship scheme in relation to a zero carbon retrofitting refurbishment that would be targeted at young people living on the Gleadus Valley estate? And final question, what exactly are the building standards and heating methods that will be used in the refurbishment of the council housing on Gleadus Valley estate in order to achieve zero carbon by 2030, as is the council's policy? That's it.
Thank you, Jenny. That's great. Jenny, if you just press the button to turn the red light off there, that's great. So, Jenny, I have some answers there which the officers have provided, so I'll just give you a note of those. So, first of all, you're asking about the £90 million budget, and that is council money, so it is there. It was agreed that in March 2021 by the council that would be provided, so that is there. So the answer to your question, has it been secured? Yes. Council lead on this. Obviously, this is the housing service, and of course it's a full council function rather than thinking about individual officers. But the head of service is Dean Butterworth, and Dean Parry King, who I'm sure you'll know now is the lead project manager. So probably for your purposes, the main contact there for the delivery of the master plan. In terms of the training and apprenticeship scheme, I think the point is this isn't specific to the GV master plan. It's part of the council's overall approach in terms of its procurement strategy for really any capital procurement project. There's the training and apprenticeships that are brought into that. There might be criticisms of that, but it's not specific to the Gleadus Valley master plan. And then finally on the standards to be applied. So the answer I got is that the plans for Gleadus Valley master plan aren't specifically to bring all homes to net zero or existing homes to EPC standard C or the National Decent Home Standard. It's not specifically that. Not surprisingly, all the new build will meet all current building regulation standards and any other standards that are required. And then if we can secure any additional external funding, then we'll try and exceed the standards, wherever it can be done. So in short, the council intends to do as much as it possibly can towards all those aims, and of course, no one sees us achieving zero carbon more than me. But we all are on board there with that. But there's no specific standards or commitments that are made that are different from any other aspect of council house building. So I hope that answers that question. Thanks for bringing it. Those will go in the minutes too. So thank you.
Am I allowed to come back on any of those answers?
Probably not in this meeting, I'd suggest, because but if you do have more, then I think we probably do take it up afterwards. I'm just conscious that we got a load of stuff to get through. I'm just getting indication though from Janet Sharp, who's our Director of Housing.
Yes, thank you, Chair Jenny. There is quite a lot of work taking place at Gleadus Valley that obviously is wider as well than housing. And obviously there is quite a number of work streams regarding Gleadus Valley that we need to deliver on, that we published as part of the master plan that was approved by the council. You may well have lots of questions. If you want to email me with those specific questions, because we are preparing a further briefing for the community, and we can make sure that they are included if that is okay, and we take them outside of this committee meeting. But I am really keen to hear from Jenny to make sure that we actually make sure that we're answering the questions that the community has on this. Thank you.
Thanks for that offer. So Jenny, I wasn't meaning to sort of cut you off. Do come back to any future meetings if you want to. It is helpful to have those questions, they're very clearly laid out. But just in terms of ongoing questions, then, yeah, can you use the channels with the officers and come back then. Fran?
Can I just ask, I think we have requested before that as members we get a briefing on the Gleadless Valley Master Plan as well. It'd be great to bring that forward so we can respond to constituent concerns as well. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's useful. That I'm sure will be in our plan for housing briefings when we have that. Okay, thanks very much. Thanks, Jenny. I don't think we have any other public questions, don't have any petitions, so let's move on. The next item's item 7, the work programme, and that is on page 21. Thank you. So, on the work programme, I think this month's relatively straightforward. So yeah, I'll pass over to Rachel just to brief us. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The work programme is on page 22, sorry, page 21. It begins on page 21. If I could just draw your attention to the top of page 22, where we would ask the committee to agree those recommendations, and they're outlined at the top there. Since the last meeting on page 24 in Appendix 1, I'd just like to draw your attention to the proposed additions and amendments to the work programme moving forwards. From page 26, we can see that that's part 3, and that is the agenda items for forthcoming meetings, inclusive of today's meetings. So it's just to draw your attention as to what is coming up in the future. And that's the summary of the work programme there. So I would like to pass back to the Chair to agree those recommendations set out at the top of page 22. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. So I think for the committee it's pointed out, so we don't have any new referrals or any other changes there. On the work programme, as you'll see on page 24, there's quite a number of things that have been pushed further down the agenda. The one that's added for next month's meeting in December is the gas servicing policy, which we need to get a grip of. No one's indicating that they've got anything to flag up on this, apart from Councillor Curran, who has.
Yeah, sorry, late hand. So just 2 minor points. At some point, I think we should have a review of the allocations policy, because I think when we changed some of the bandings last time, it's worked well in some places and not as intended in others, and certainly in some of the blocks in my patch has created some issues. So I think if we could add that to look at in the future. And then just a broader point, I'm always sort of frustrated by items on agendas that don't need to be there. And what springs to mind today is item 11 that's on the agenda today, which is flagged in this report as a post-decision. But actually, the report's not asking us to do anything other than note it, which to my mind means you could have sent it to me in an email, rather than use the sort of precious time in this committee where we've got 6 meetings to deal with a whole programme for a whole department. In my view, not enough time to do the work that's needed. So if we could sort of take out post decisions that actually aren't decisions and just things for us to note and acknowledge exist. So we're actually more action focused rather than sort of passively nodding on things that have already been done.
Yeah, okay, thanks, thanks Ben. Both good points. Just found the allocations one. We do have that. That's actually one of the things that is being bumped off from, I think, December's meeting until later on, but it is still on the agenda. Yeah, so we haven't got a date for it, but it is still on the work plan, so it's on allocations. And on your other point about things that are for information but not decision, yeah, we need to make full use of the housing briefings that we have, but there are some times when we need to table things so that it's available to the public, and that can be used as a formal item there. We've got Sue indicating.
Yeah, thank you. It's just looking at the work programme and things have been, I understand and appreciate the reasons why things have been removed from the agenda for this meeting, and it's just a new date to be arranged. We've got a date in December, but again, that's got a packed agenda. We can't afford to leave some of these items for very long, but so we need a date. We need to know when we're going to be discussing these things, because there's something in particular that I'm very interested in, and something that's been discussed previously, and I just want to know, really, have you got any idea of when you're going to have this meeting to discuss these items that are coming, not coming?
Yes, which item is it, Sue?
It's just to do with accommodation for vulnerable people. It was raised under a confidential item in one of the briefings.
Janet?
Yes, certainly. There are quite a number of reports that we need to bring forward, both for knowledge briefings and also through to the committee. I am happy to commit to work with Douglas and Rachel in populating that work programme. One of the things we're trying to do is try to balance the meeting and make sure we're bringing reports when they need to be approval. There are some specific bids going in to secure external funding so we can increase the supply of accommodation for vulnerable people, and I think I'm just trying to firm up when those bid dates are, so that will make it a sensible time to obviously bring that item forward. And we've also got the homeless prevention strategy coming to the next meeting, and that will also include set out what we need in terms of vulnerable people accommodation. So hopefully we might be able to wrap it up in some of those items, and certainly on the comment on the allocations, review, we are on with the review. I do think it requires wider member engagement on the allocations policy, and that's why we're bringing it at a later time to give plenty of time to discuss that very sensitive policy. Thank you.
Thanks for that. That's helpful. There's probably some things we need to pick up at pre-agenda meetings so that we're sure about what we can get onto the committees. Also, there's always pressure on committees. Shall we move on from that? We've got the recommendations that we formally need to address on page 22. So essentially that's the recommendation that the committee's work programme as set out is agreed, including the additions and amendments that we've noted. Consideration be given to further, well, there's no further, consideration be given to the further additions. Let's just delete that. That doesn't make any sense in this context. We're talking about approving the work programme. So it's recommendation 1 on page 22. And yeah, well, in fact, it's just recommendation 1 that we need to decide, isn't it? I think. Sorry, does everyone follow that? So I'm just inviting everyone to approve that the committee's work programme as set out be agreed. Is everyone content with that? Quick show of hands. Anyone disagreeing? I think you're on the agreeing then, so yeah, okay. I'll take that as passed there. Thanks very much. So on the agenda, I think we've got a duplicate line here. So we were on item 7 there. Item 8 is the same one, so we've dealt with that. And we're now moving on to the section under formal decisions there. So as we indicated before, and as we agreed under the exclusion item, we're going to move items 9 and 10 to the end of the agenda, and therefore we move on to item 11 first of all. So I'll ask Janet, as our Director of Housing, to introduce this, but really this is for information and awareness to members, and really about the stance that we've taken as a council in making representations to government about what is a potentially huge cut to resources available for social housing. So it's an important issue for us. But I'll hand over to the Director to explain.
Thank you. So the report that has been presented, obviously as part of the agenda for today's meeting, is retrospective, but this, we were asked to respond to formal consultation on the government's seeking our views on bringing about a temporary amendment to what is called the rent standard for social housing. This is the guidance that we use to set rents each year, And normally we have rent, we have an agreed approach that rents will go up by CPI plus 1% each and every year. And we are able to work with the government, and that is quite stable over a number of years, normally between 4 to 5 years, that is set. Given some of the significant cost of living issues that the government is considering entering into a temporary amendment to that rent standard, and that could change the rent and move away from the CPI plus 1%, and have asked for our views on different rent increase levels for 23-24. So we have done quite a lot of detailed work. We cannot see this in isolation of the impact this will have on the viability of the 30-year housing investment programme and also the housing revenue account. So you will see within our response that has been tabled with government details, obviously, our response to some of the specific questions that have been asked of us as a council, but also we have done a lot of work to see how we align with registered providers, both in the city and our national registered providers, and also we've done a huge amount of work with other local authorities to see if we are aligned with their thinking on the key issues. So our response here is hopefully straightforward. It does set out very clearly the significant financial risks for the HRA business plan if we do not increase rents in line with the current rent standard, in terms of rents being increased by the levels of inflation plus 1%. But also, it also means that, you know, if we don't bring the income in that we need to make sure that the housing revenue account is financially viable and actually, you know, we can balance our accounts, it also means that the risk is to tenant services and also the quality of services that we provide for tenants. And I know that they are a priority for us and also a priority for many tenants in the city. So I wasn't planning on going through all of the report in terms of the responses. We needed to get a quick decision to be able to submit views from Sheffield on this consultation. But one of the things that we have done is brought it here for information. And also, we are also publishing, obviously, this responder, making it available so that, you know, our tenants in particular know what we have provided back to government, and obviously for your information as well. Happy to pick up any questions. And we've also got Peter here, who did a huge amount of work on the modelling to be able to inform that consultation.
Thank you, Janet. And thank you to both of you for doing all the background work and research to do this. Any questions from the committee on this? Right.
Just a quick comment, really. I think we should be making it clear that by arguing we shouldn't be setting a rent cap doesn't mean we are automatically saying we should be looking for an 11% increase in rents. That is not what we're saying. I think what this paper did give us an opportunity to do. We are looking for flexibility because we do have to find that balance between the rent rise and the cuts to housing. So, but I think what was most important about this is that it actually gave us the opportunity to respond to the government and tell the government in detail about the challenges that we are facing as a council, largely as a result of their policies. I might add that I can't actually remember which government it was we responded to because they've changed so often recently.
Yes, if I could just confirm, we have provided quite a number of responses to government that rather than having a blanket rent setting process, that we should be able, as a city, to be able to set our rents locally, and then it will flex over time depending on the needs of the business plan and also our tenant priorities. So we have that. Thank you for raising that. That is absolutely embedded in all of the questions around having that local decision-making process on rents rather than a blanket position across the country. Many business plans are in very different positions up and down the country, and no city or town is the same. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other questions on that? No? Okay. I mean, if I may, I'll just sort of just draw attention to the figure put in there about the cost to the whole housing investment programme over the 30-year period of the business plan, and that's a staggering £285 million that will be lost as a possible result of this government intervention if they set the rent cap at 5%. They could even set it lower, which would be an even bigger impact on that. And we just to state the obvious, we know this, but of course we've got to remember that council housing services, tenants are only paid for by tenants themselves. And if people aren't putting the money into the pot, it means a reduction in service inevitably. And that's not something we want to do. We want to have good quality housing and good investment in it. But I'm just going to make the other point that actually, given that many of our tenants do receive benefits, this is a very important way for us to bring in money from central government to local government and the local economy through housing benefit subsidy. And really the only big winner by this government's proposal is the Treasury, not us in Sheffield. May just be making a point here. If there's no other comments on that, we do have a formal recommendation on it, and it's on page 38. So the recommendation here is to note the response that was submitted and the implications on the housing revenue accounts that were highlighted very succinctly by Janet. And then secondly, notes the further report will be submitted to the Housing Policy Committee once the outcomes of the consultation are known, in order to inform the decision that we will have to make regarding council housing rents for next year. I think it's fair to say we don't know when the government will respond to this consultation and in what form, but that's the best we can do. Is everyone happy with that recommendation? Kind of quick show of hands there. Thank you. Right, so no dissent there. That's it, that has passed. Thank you. Let's move on to next item, and that will be item 12. So we're now on to introductory tenancies. So I think I'm going to hand over to the Director of Housing again. Janet, over to you.
Right, thank you. This is a proposal around implementing an introductory tenancy approach for new tenants that are securing council housing. We have done a lot of work over a number of years on this, and today Sheffield City Council hasn't had any sort of probationary tenancies or an introductory tenancy, and that is obviously to let for new tenants council housing on a non-secure tenancy for a period of time. The report is setting that out as being 12 months, but also with the option to extend that if we do not feel that that tenant is right for that property, or actually by allowing to move to a secure tenancy, that will create other issues. So one of the things that introductory tenancy is not about, it is not about a targeted approach to make sure we can evict as many people as possible. That is not the intention. One of the things that we need to do is we are letting tenancies sometimes where, you know, we haven't got that sort of probationary period to make sure that that tenant is right for that property, and also to make sure that it's also that new tenant can integrate well, obviously, into our communities. We do have a whole raft of support that we provide for our tenancies, both new tenancies and existing tenancies, that range from a tenancy management service. We have a high support service for complex tenancies. We have a housing first model for some of our extremely complex individuals, and also floating support. So we do provide an awful lot of support for new tenancies. However, despite that, and given how short we are of affordable housing in the city, is we find ourselves giving automatically secure tenancies without fully realising the needs of those new tenants, and that can often manifest itself in some really difficult issues. Once we've granted a secure tenancy, it is quite a long process if we need to move that tenant from that tenancy into other accommodation. And often that can create very significant issues in our accommodation, in other neighbours and also in the wider community. I absolutely, clear in terms of we have a housing duty to make sure everyone has a home and everyone is safe in the city. But it is a very formal process if we suddenly find that that tenant is not right for that property and it is creating other issues on our estates. So what we're proposing is to introduce a probationary tenancy. This is well used in most local authorities and also across our housing associations, both within South Yorkshire and elsewhere. And this is to give us that time to work closely with those tenancies to make sure if it's right, and if it's not right, we're able then to work with that tenant and try and find a better solution for their housing needs before we grant secure tenancies. And if we're not sure after the 12-month period, we have the ability to extend that slightly. So we're trying to do a number of things. It's making sure we absolutely provide that wraparound support for new tenancies, and particularly some of our most vulnerable individuals that are moving into council housing. Should make it easier for us to work with new tenants and to be able to take enforcement action where we need to do that, but also if we need to move people into more alternative accommodation or something that better suits their needs, we're able to do that a little bit easier than the formal process if we grant initially a secure tenancy. It also will enable us to build those positive relationships, and I think I've brought to this committee reports before around being really clear about what a tenant's responsibility is in terms of looking after their home, making sure that they are not creating issues for their neighbours, and also that home is suitable, whilst also being really clear on the council's responsibility for our tenants. That we will repair our tenancies, we will keep them in a good condition, we will provide a tenancy management service, we will provide support where is needed. So it also helps that journey in terms of really be clear what our tenant responsibilities are and what are the council's responsibilities as landlord are. And also, we often find ourselves with quite lengthy drawn out processes where significant antisocial behaviour is being created, and that is incredibly difficult for local people to be able to manage, especially when presently, our processes can mean it can be up to 12 months to be able to seek possession of a property, and during that period it costs a significant amount of money for the council to be able to manage that legal process, that additional operational resources to be able to manage it. It's also a very rigid process, that ultimately will end up in an eviction, whereas I am hopeful that the introductory and the probationary tenancies gives us more time, more flexibility to work with individuals rather than ending up in that formal process after a considerable amount of time. I am keen that we align. We have a significant number of properties, housing association properties, where we have nomination rights, and so I'm keen that we align ourselves with housing associations where we have that, and also other local authorities who use this successfully. This is only one of many tools that we have to manage tenancies, but I think would be useful to introduce this policy so we have a whole range of different approaches that we can take, that we will tailor to individual needs, both of the tenants and us as the council as landlord, be able to address concerns in our communities. So one of the things that the report also does is really sets out clearly that this will help us in terms of tenancy management of our allocations and matching process into council properties, but also that ongoing day-to-day tenancy management of our estates, and particularly how we support some of our most vulnerable. So I see that bringing significant improvements, and also help with creating those balanced communities, sustainable tenancies, and also to make sure that, that our allocations are correct for individuals and properties, but also to make sure that that doesn't have an adverse impact on some of our local neighbourhoods. So for me, the report hopefully is straightforward. You know, I am seeking the committee's endorsement into moving towards a probationary tenancies, and if that is supported, then I will put in place the checks and balances and also the procedure about how we would introduce that and consult under the wider consultation with our tenancies, and particularly in terms of those new tenancies and new letting arrangements. We have done some consultation as part of this policy to get feedback, and I've got here Jack Hewitt today who led on that consultation for the service. We have received, you know, considerable support to introduce that. Sometimes our tenants see the impact of us letting properties that is not suitable or appropriate, and that is coming through very clear as part of the responses to the consultation. So this has been, you know, a long time in coming for formal approval, and I think quite rightly so, because we need to make sure that this is the right thing to do. We don't have to do it. It's not something that we legally have to impose, but I do believe with a whole raft of other tools we have to be able to manage our tenancies, this would be a positive step forward for our wider tenants, and I think it would also be a positive step forward for our new tenants who know they are going to be supported, particularly in the first year of their tenancies, and also know that we have other support in place to help them sustain positively a tenancy. Our aim is not for this to increase evictions, which our evictions rate is very low as a city, but also to help people to sustain their tenancies. But also, if that property is not right for that individual, that we quickly can move to allocating an alternative property that might be more suitable, and particularly if there is more support in place for that individual. So happy to pick up any questions. You know, as myself, as Jack here, obviously, who's project managed the consultation, who's here with me today, you know, on this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Janet. That's great. Now, first of all, any questions from the committee there? Councillor Woodcraft.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, thank you very much for this. It's something I'm quite interested in. So, I mean, presumably all new tenants would go through this process, and for many tenants it would be straightforward, but it's the more difficult ones that you would pick up on. That's correct, is it?
Yes, certainly. The majority of tenants who have a new council home, you know, both whether they're transferring tenants or whether they're new tenants, are really successful. They pay the rent, they look after their homes, they settle well into a new home. Now, having a council tenancy and property is a valuable commodity because there is so little affordable housing in the city. So the vast majority, so that is straightforward tenancy management, making sure if they need any additional support. We do, though, have increasing numbers of individuals with a specific priority. You know, people who have lots of, you know, support needs, and entering into general needs accommodation requires them to have additional support. So that's why we've put lots of other wraparound support. So rather than it being one size fits all, we look at those individuals and we make sure the right package of support to help them succeed and be able to sustain that tenancy. And that's what this is about. But if that can't work for whatever reason, if actually other issues are emerging, it will enable us through a really clear legal process to be able to make sure we're taking proportionate action, and also be able to work with that tenant and probably either maybe relocate or actually take enforcement action to possess that property.
Okay, thank you. So another one. If that allocation doesn't work out and you have to move them within the period of the probation, what what is the process? What are the rights on either side?
Right, so what we can't do is just move somebody. So it's not so we move. We have to follow a clear, divine legal process. But because they won't have a secure tenancy, when we get obviously through that legal process, it is a little bit easier. But what we must be is proportionate. We must make sure we've taken all the needs into account, that we obviously have provided the support that we should be putting in place to help that tenancy succeed. And obviously, if we have very vulnerable individuals, then I do have a housing duty to make sure that they have a safe place to stay. Those things can't be removed. But one of the things that this is, because it won't be a secure tenancy, it enables us to, rather than get to the end of the process, sometimes which is possessing a property or an eviction, is actually say there might be an alternative solution here and a more easier solution for those individuals.
Okay. So,
But it is a clearly defined legal process that we must follow.
Yeah. So a couple more. So you say the legal process is somewhat easier. In what way is it easier?
Well, if you think of like private rented accommodation, they will have a short hold tenancy, and also we could serve notice, and that is something that can take place. So in that way, there are clear, responsibilities on both sides, but we won't have granted a whole lifetime secure tenancy. So we can say this is not appropriate for you and take those steps to end that tenancy arrangement.
Okay. And I think my last question...
One more? Go.
Yeah, my last question is, so where a tenant has to be moved, where would you move them to? What kind of accommodation would you move them to? I mean, I know this is a really difficult one for you.
It is, yes. So one of the things that we do have in place, so we have a number of arrangements. So, often, if we cannot meet those needs with council housing, we work closely with housing associations who have between them about 18,000 properties in the city. We have nomination rights to those properties, so we deal with the lettings with them. We've also got really good relationships with the private rented sector, particularly some of our most trusted private landlords. And also, they're in the city, that supply of supported housing, council commission services. So but often we find that individuals are going into general needs, which sometimes is too early for many new tenants. It's just too early. And even with wraparound support, can lead to early tenancy failure. It could be that they can't afford that property. It could be there's antisocial behaviour occurring. It could be noise. It could be they cannot cope with managing a property. It can be a whole range of different issues. So one of the things that we would do is look to see whether they need a formal assessment. It may require a health assessment, and also some individuals may be better suited to either move on or supported housing accommodation, or maybe with wraparound commission services. So what we've got obviously on the estates, if you take an estate example, sometimes moving people into a general needs property in the middle of sort of a council estate, although we've got tenancy management and support arrangements, some individuals need more than that. So we'll be able to do that proper assessment and make sure we can help them sustain their tenancy in that general needs accommodation, which is incredibly important. But if we find that actually other behaviours are manifesting themselves and creating lots of issues, then finding a slightly easier way to be able to have those conversations and place people in accommodation with the support that they need.
Thank you. Are you okay with the question? Can I come back to you, Cliff?
Yeah.
If you put your mic off, just because quite a few people have indicated they want to speak, so I think Councillor Habe is the next one.
Firstly, thank you, Janet, for presenting that. It was very helpful. But however, I'm just a little bit confused because the common consensus is people with difficulties will be evicted. And the problem with, so just to dissect it, is speed up evictions, take away from the courts and incentivize people to behave properly. I think people are rarely malicious. They rarely do things to cause problems to their neighbours. There's usually things like substance abuse or mental health issues in the background. I feel like just taking them out of that home and moving them somewhere else doesn't tackle the root of the problem. It just displaces it somewhere else in society by moving them somewhere. There's a few things I didn't agree with this that said in line with other councils. So, are we allowed to mention other councils? That's a democratically right thing to do. So Lambeth Council has this. However, if you follow Quadro housing or housing issues throughout the country, Lambeth isn't doing that well. So to say we will be in line with peers, we don't want to be like our peers. We definitely want to be better than our peers. And I think this is something where we can scrutinize properly and realize that implementing it will probably, like the law of unintended consequences, will increase homelessness. You mentioned that the housing team is hopeful in helping them. However, when it comes to making concrete decisions like eviction, it's secure. But when it's to help, it's hopeful, and that's the problem that I want to highlight. So my question is, how secure are those services? Are they ready to help people? And obviously there's a living cost crisis, so it's going to be exacerbated on like whatever internal issues people have. Does Sheffield City Council have the necessary infrastructure to help people who may be struggling with those things, or the support after evicting them? And just last thing before I just keep on speaking. So I wrote here, give me a second. Yeah, so like I said, these people are people that need help, they need face-to-face contact. Maybe the courts, that long process of the courts is necessary to tackle those issues. And I know we have an amazing team, officers team, housing officers team. However, things can fall through the net. And this seems quick and rushed. And I feel like however long it takes, the court will identify those problems and then help those people. And also it's saying we speed up evictions like we have a massive backlog of evictions waiting. That's not the case here. There isn't, hundreds and hundreds of evictions waiting in Sheffield City Council. Am I wrong, or is there many evictions waiting?
Majority of our evictions are relate to payment of rent, and we do have significant issues with tenants who obviously secure a council property and then don't pay the rent, and then we can be in a long drawn out process to do that. We also, will take enforcement action for non-compliance of access into properties, and also for antisocial behaviour. But the vast majority will be through rent or other non-compliance issues and breaches of tenancy conditions. And our tenancy conditions are clear in terms of the responsibilities of both the council and individual tenants. In terms of, across the city, there is a significant shortage of supported housing accommodation. And also we're refocusing some of the council's commissioning services in terms of the right type of accommodation. But far too often what we find is individuals obviously being placed through our allocations policy into properties where some individuals are not ready to be able to live independently in our properties. And that is a growing issue. And like you said, maybe some addictions, people with an urgent, need for accommodation, people who've come through a homeless route, people who are escaping domestic violence, our refugees, asylum, so individuals who need an awful lot of support. So what that does do, that can create issues, significant issues, on our estate. So it is a balance. I have clear housing duties to make sure that people, and particularly our most vulnerable, are safe and secure. But sometimes a general need housing initially is not the right thing. People may need move-on accommodation, they may need supported housing, they may need other temporary or emergency accommodation. So what we have already in place is we introduced Housing First over 12 months ago, and this was where there would be intensive support for an individual household, and that is working really well. Quite small numbers, but for very complex cases, that is working well, and that does place people, but it places people and also with that wraparound support. We have other sort of individuals who just need a bit of floating support, a bit of handholding, a bit of helping them to sustain their tenancies. And also we have a high support service, and that is particularly we're using a significant number of properties as dispersed temporary accommodation, and that is creating many issues across many neighbourhoods in the city. We're trying to bring forward, as part of our stock increase programme, new supply of temporary accommodation where 24/7 services can be in place. That's not been built yet, but once that is, that should reduce the amount of dispersed accommodation. But unfortunately, what we are facing is significant numbers of tenancies that are failing out too early, and that can be either antisocial behaviour, that can be that those individuals are struggling themselves, and also, you know, we're not able to collect the rent. And this is manifesting itself now in many neighbourhoods, and that is because as we've got a smaller and smaller amount of council housing, and we're taking more and more properties for very specific individuals, that is creating some local issues. So what this is not about is saying anyone who is in need, we are going to end their tenancy. That is not what we're talking about here. But I think we do need to change the way we are supporting tenants, and sometimes we are placing people too early, or individuals who cannot afford the tenancies. And one of the things we do, this gives us an opportunity to have, rather than a rigid, secure tenants from day one, to be able to do that intensive work. But I do have floating support. I have a high support service for complex people. I have a housing first, and we also work closely with the council's commission services, who commission hostels, who commission other support services, and it is about joining up that support. And if that fails, then, or is it that actually we've placed someone in it might have felt okay through the bidding process for housing, but actually it's the wrong tenant in the wrong place, and they are struggling, and that community is struggling as well.
Okay, thanks, Senator. Have you got one to come back on? Yeah.
I'm going to say thank you for that. It was very helpful again. And I know, of course, it's not a malicious take on evicting people. My point wasn't that that's what had happened. I'd say the unintended consequences of that could potentially happen. So, you know, from the first committee, we talked about being firm on rent, and now we're talking about quicker evictions. The precedent that's being set is quite dangerous, if you see what I'm saying, if you cannot understand the consequences that might balloon up. And I know there's, you know, many supports surrounding tenants that live around, but like you said, unfortunately, some of that is quite, you know, restricted as it is. So it's just going to be even more restrictive because you're going to increase the supply of people that need those services. That's the point. It's nothing I feel like is malicious. Of course it's not malicious. It's in the best interest of the council and the city. But it's just those unintended consequences that I feel like as a committee we have to think about a little bit more.
If I can just say, we've looked up and down the country. This certainly hasn't been rushed. I think this has been 4 years in the making. So it's been a very long time, and my officers are acutely aware of obviously vulnerable people, and also wanting to make sure that we understand what would happen to vulnerable individuals if they can't live where we're allocating to. So that's always been at the heart of everything that myself and my officers have done in terms of developing this model. We've also seen good and bad practice up and down the country. And sometimes I think the London market tends to be quite different. But what we do know is the vast majority of housing associations have offered this successfully. You know, they don't have many evictions. You know, and I think I feel comfortable that, you know, there are some fantastic local authorities and some fantastic housing associations who've managed this well, who've looked at how they target support, and we hasn't seen a huge rise in evictions. You know, it's very much the opposite in being able to sustain tenancies. And so I feel comfortable. There will always be good and bad practice up and down the country, but I'm hoping that we've been able to extract the best practice from many housing providers to be able to inform how we would operate.
Okay, this is just genuinely, last thing, sorry. But I understand that it's been 4 years in the making, statistic-based council. You look at the data, you realise it worked. However, the current economic climate and the cost of living crisis, we haven't lived in it long enough to kind of get that data. So is it the right time to implement this? That's the better question.
I think given the pressure, the unprecedented pressure we have
On the
in the
council,
city, on the city, our homeless is increasing, and we are seeing more people, having to leave, particularly private rented accommodation, or in risk of losing their home for other reasons, so needing. So I feel this is absolutely the right time, because we have to both make sure we're making the best use of the council housing stock, and also housing association, obviously, nominations. But we also need to make sure that our wider support services are in place to support our most vulnerable. And I think the time is right now that we provide that intensive support for many of our tenancies. Some of our existing tenancies are really struggling, so we're putting a lot of support in, as the council is providing a lot of support in. But I think, we will potentially see like a growth in people that need additional support. But also I think we have to make sure that we are avoiding some of the significant amount of work that officers have to deal with on a day-to-day basis to manage tenancies where we should never have allocated that tenant to that property in the first place.
Okay, thanks very much. Hope no more questions there. Just conscious, thanks, it covered a lot of ground there. And there's 3 people want to speak, and I want to say a few words myself. 4 people want to speak. Everyone wants to speak. Okay, that's fine. I just want to make the observation that, of course, we're talking about introductory tenancies, which is of a decision is about the ability to evict tenants. It's separate from tenancy support, isn't it? And it's separate from the issue of allocations, which Ben raised earlier. Denise, do you want to come in?
Thank you, Chair. It's about a balance, isn't it? I mean, we've got to look at the other tenants that are on these estates. I, for one, have dealt with lots of antisocial behaviour over the years where, these other tenants are living in hell in some places. So it's about getting the right balance and not about always evictions. Because of the policy how it is at the moment, the allocations policy, I have in the past witnessed where we've put families in properties that have not been right. They've not been supported by the families. They've been completely in a different area, and we can't do anything about it for at least a year. So I welcome this introductory tenancies, and I'm pleased to see that the consultation, the tenants were in favour of it. So that swings me in the right direction. My question is, during the probationary period, are we looking at a set visiting time? So are we going to visit them every 2 months, every 3 months, every 6 months, whatever? Or are we looking at putting in the support, more support if needed? But initially, have you just got something for your officers to look at, say, in 3 months we visit them, or in 6 months, etc.?
Yeah, yes, certainly. And so one of the things that we would do with any new tenant is try to understand their needs when entering into a new tenancy. And what we would be doing here is looking at what we think is the most appropriate time to keep, obviously, visiting that tenancy, but, to make sure that they need, but also if there is any initial support that they need, is make sure that is in place. And we have we have a strong track record as well of some of this. We manage a lot of care leavers, first time in a tenancy, and trying to provide that help and support for individuals. And so what we would do, but we will have some new tenants that are absolutely, they will manage their tenancies, they will pay the rent, they will look after their homes, they will create beautiful homes. And actually, at the end of the probational period, we'd just convert it straight, which I'm expecting the majority will just be converted straight into a secure tenancy. I think it will enable us to identify those that actually need a lot of support. And if we need a little bit more time, there is flexibility to extend that probationary period. But there is nothing that focuses the attention more than people who want to have a secure home. And actually we do, in some instances, do need to change behaviours because it can have significant impact on other tenancies. And that is what creates a significant amount of work for my officers.
Thanks, Janet.
Thank you. Can I just make one more comment? I've note about the resources that you were speaking about, the cost of living. It probably, when you're focusing on this and freeing up time, like, you know, when you're spending an awful lot of time on people that need a lot of support and you're putting in resources, having this 1 year tenancy approach could free up some resource for you. Is that what you were trying to say?
It could, but it also could mean that we're absolutely focusing officers on the things we need to do. You know, a long drawn out legal process to secure, which is what happens now, is quite intensive, not only my services, you know, people in obviously in health and housing, obviously our legal services that are here today, you know, it's expensive. It takes a huge amount of there. We're trying to balance the needs of an individual as well as the needs of nearby tenancies, you know, and also it takes a long time. And I think that this gives us an opportunity to do things a little bit quicker, proportionate, safely, you know, but it gives us that opportunity. I would like officers to be spending a lot more time actually improving the quality of our neighbourhoods, the street, the litter, the waste, you know, the tenancies, you know, providing support where it's needed, rather than small numbers of quite intensive issues where a lot of resources are having to be deployed.
Thank you, yes. We've covered a lot there. I don't know what more questions there can be, but there certainly are some. Obviously, don't ask questions being asked already, but shall I go to Suze, Councillor Auckland, first of all?
Yeah, thank you, Douglas Johnson. Yeah, Janet, thank you so much for bringing this report. And some of what Denise Fox has already said, I do see, I understand and agree with. I think when this was discussed previously, I was very concerned about the more vulnerable members of our society and vulnerable tenants and what support was going to be available to them. And I think you have reassured me on aspects of that. I just wonder, because with the temporary probationary tenancies, might that actually avoid some evictions because you'll be moving people to something that is more appropriate for their needs? So I just wonder if and your comment on that would be welcome, if it actually might, all of this might avoid the need to go through the court procedure and avoid evictions. It works in neighbouring authorities. Well, we know that it works in Rotherham. It's successful in York. And I think you've had a long time to work on it, as you've already said, and we've still got time to tweak it, and us as councillors can comment on it and to make sure that we get a good system in place. So, I'd like Janet for you to comment on whether or not you think it might avoid future evictions, or some. And the other question I've got, if you have a tenant and you find that the accommodation they've first been allocated is not suitable for their needs, or that they need to move back into some sort of supported accommodation, does it all start again? Does the temporary tenancy start again? The probationary period, I'm not sure how that would work. I think it's important for us to have some alignment with the other authorities and with housing associations. The only concern that I've got, really, is a comment that you did make about how sometimes if somebody's accommodation isn't meeting their needs and you're trying to move them, and you would try some of the other projects like Thursday projects or moving to a specific housing association, you mentioned moving people into the private sector, and that would concern me because there are still, I believe, the moves are still valid to move to no-fault evictions, and that would concern me that we were moving potentially very vulnerable people into an area where they would have no protection at all, and then they'd come back to us and have to start all over again. I'll leave it at that because a lot of things have already been said.
Yeah, just briefly, yeah, thank you for this report. And you're right, you know, this works successfully up and down the country, incredibly well. And obviously we have done a lot of work to take that best practice and some of the issues. I do believe that this will reduce evictions. You know, I certainly don't see evictions increasing. But one of the things that I do think is that it will also help us to tackle, you know, and one of the things that we mentioned earlier is we have a lack of supported housing in the city, and we also have, you know, some of our council commissioning contracts in terms of where we commission specific things like the Thursday Project and other things like that are not focused. I think this will enable us to give the intelligence to make sure we're clear what we are commissioning in terms of other specialist support, in terms of accommodation and our own stock increase programme and the development programmes of housing associations. So I think it will help join the dots up on some of those issues. And I think in terms of the probation, I think if we're, you know, moving people, then what we would do is take a sensible approach about what is the probationary period to make sure that works, and avoid just moving people from property to property. That's very much something I want to avoid. But actually, is how do we enable people to be able to sustain that tenancy? But actually, if something is absolutely not right, then obviously we have to then look what is the most appropriate, and that could be on supported accommodation, it could be on our high support service, it could be on our housing first model, and it could be that there is a period then when that person can take back that property because they are ready to secure that tenancy. So I think it gives us much more flexibility in terms of our operating model. And I think saying is looking at that like best practice. We already use a huge amount of private rented accommodation in the city to meet housing needs. You know, because we simply do not have the supply of homes available. But we do have some fantastic arrangements with private landlords. You know, sometimes they get a bit of a bad press. You know, it's like all landlords. There will be good, and there'll be some that could be better. So we're doing a lot of work at the moment to increase the portfolio of private landlords accommodation to help meet individual needs. And sometimes that is helpful, particularly where families may have children going to school, there's no council housing nearby, and they're travelling huge distances. So sometimes private rented is a better option for people. One of the things that we do where, particularly for some of our homeless, where we are placing them in private rented accommodation, we will provide that wraparound support for landlords, and landlords themselves have commended us on terms of they are happy to take individuals, even someone with very specific complex needs, because they know the council's got the wraparound support services going into that property as well to help that landlord. So, and we're not seeing on our trusted landlords, we are not seeing huge evictions where we're providing that wraparound support. We are seeing other evictions where there is just general lettings in private rented, but that's something that the other part of my services deal with in terms of private sector housing enforcement.
Okay, thank you.
Just a
go on. Yes, go on.
Thank you for that reassurance. And I hadn't appreciated that the full wraparound support was available to tenants that we placed in private tenancies. So that with complex needs, yes, yeah, no. So that's really good. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. We've got some more people want to ask questions who haven't spoken yet. I'm just conscious of time because obviously we've still quite a bit to go through, certainly on the finances and things. It's been some really useful discussion so far. After you finish that, I was going to go to Councillor Belbin next, but I'm just going to butt in and give myself a chance because I said I was going to say something. I have to say, I mean, it's no surprise if you've heard me say this before. I'm not personally in favour of introductory tenancies. I do have concerns about the approach of moving to effective no-fault eviction. It doesn't remove the need for court processes. You still have to apply to court to have the tenant evicted, but the point is it is to remove the court's discretion so that if something's picked up at a late stage, and in my experience there's often when you have vulnerable tenants, it means the court can't then deal with it. It is fair to say that the housing service doesn't always get it right, which of course is an important balance for the court process where the court at present can always refuse eviction if it's reasonable to do so. And the point about this is to prevent them considering that and requiring evictions to go ahead even when the court might consider it is unreasonable. And I say that as a former housing advisor. I have to say I was always very thankful that we didn't have introductory tenancies in Sheffield. It doesn't, in my experience around the country, it doesn't necessarily reduce the court processes because, of course, it can make them more complicated, and instead you sometimes end up diverting proceedings into the High Court instead of the County Court. The final point that I'm probably most concerned about is the sort of equality impact, to be fair. And when I have seen the equality impact assessment, I'm not convinced it actually picks up all the issues, but I'm content with the summary. In the summary that's in paragraph 4.1.2 in the report, identifies the risk there, and it's the risk that, and it says here in black and white, the risk of adopting introductory tenancies would lead to an increase in evictions and homelessness for vulnerable groups. And that is my concern. And certainly my experience of being a housing advisor is that for many very vulnerable people, or for ordinarily vulnerable people, they were actually picked up by being part of the court process where the court had discretion there. And that's really why I don't support introductory tenancies personally. It's for the committee to decide as a whole, and we'll go with that. But I just want to sort of have my say on that. Shall I go over, though, to, go off this side, over to France, so Councillor Belden, thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I appreciate a lot of what you've said, Janet, and I think I've seen, in my experience, quite a lot of those examples sometimes of those unsuccessful tenancies, particularly where quite vulnerable people have been placed in homes that they haven't been ready to go into. They've ended up being victims of criminal exploitation, which has actually caused enormous problems not only for them but for their neighbours and so on. And I think it is the most vulnerable, whether they're neighbours or the individuals concerned, who are kind of most affected by it. So I think all that, you know, we need to be using all the tools we've got in the box basically to provide that kind of support and looking for the right kind of housing for people. So I do think that's really important. One of the question I wanted to ask is a bit relevant to what Councillor Johnson's just raised, actually, which was about the appeal process that it talks about in the paper, and how there is still an appeal process, it says, around that. So how are we ensuring that that is an independent process, if you like, and is that we are dealing with these issues in a fair and proportionate way? And secondly, you know, we've talked quite a bit about the data and the evidence from other authorities. I think we probably have some evidence in Sheffield, actually, don't we? Because social landlords are already using introductory tenancies. So it'd be useful to have some information from that. My own experience is I get a lot less issues. I've never had an issue raised. I get a lot of housing casework, but never has it been about something from an introductory tenancy issue from a social landlord. But what data will we collect, and how can we perhaps review this decision and review how it's affecting people over the next year, so that we are a bit confident that we're addressing some of the issues that have been raised, and perhaps this is something we could bring back to a future committee to look at what data we're collecting and the evidence around the impact that this is having, because I do note it's something as well that we could choose to revoke quite easily if we feel that it's not meeting the needs of our tenants.
Thank you. Janet.
Yes, just with that. What we do for the most complex housing cases is we have a multi-agency review meeting, you know, and that will have representatives from mental health services, social workers, and other people. So it won't just be the housing reviewing these cases. And one of the things I would do within the procedures would to make sure that we have got that absolutely collective view on this, and that will be written into the procedures. And like you're saying, you know, in terms of many housing associations, they will do checks and balances before they accept a tenancy, you know, and one of the things that the council doesn't do that, because we have our legal housing duties, is we will just accept a tenancy and award duty. And I think that makes this even more important, so that we are trying to actually try and manage complex tenancies, but also, you know, give us some time to actually making sure that works well, both for an individual tenant, suitability of property, and also for the wider communities, which is incredibly important. But with regard to the review, I would see that we would bring forward to committee, you know, probably a 12-month review. You know, I am bringing forward to this committee a review of the allocations policy, which goes hand in hand, I think, with some of this work as well. And also, we probably should also bring to this committee the successes that we've had with our Housing First model as well, because that has worked incredibly well in many areas of the city now.
Thank you, Janet. You've got that front. Shall I pass over to Councillor Thornton?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for bringing this report, Janet. It's nice to see something positive and that tenants are really in support of coming to committee. I wasn't actually going to talk about this, I suppose, as just a general comment. I think that flexibility when you've got generally, if you've got issues in terms of your health or your mental health or your finances, is incredibly important. And it's something that I experienced about 5 years ago. And I think when we're looking at how we support this as a committee, or if we support this as a committee, it's whether we want to lock people into tenancies that might not be suitable for them. So I'm very much in favour of this. I was locked into a tenancy that I wasn't financially able of doing, and I had serious mental ill health. So I understand the impacts that being locked into a tenancy that's unsuitable for you can have. So I really am grateful that you're bringing this. I just wanted to ask a couple of questions on how do you feel like this will impact our speed in dealing with antisocial behaviour? Do you feel like that will speed it up? Including like the reasons for flexibility isn't necessarily within the report. So I just wanted to draw out a couple of specific examples, say for where a property previously has been age banded, would the age mix of a property be considered if someone after an introductory tenancy didn't feel like it was suitable for them? And also in terms of geography and geographic access to support service. A lot of our estates are quite far out from the city centre where people might be accessing support, for example. So would geography to support, say for example, the service accesses that they might need, might that be considered too? And it does say that it's automatically converted, which I think is really good. I just wanted to confirm what this actually means for a tenant. Will they receive a letter? Will they have to sign any complicated paperwork in order to make that happen? I just wanted to just draw out what that process is, or is it just tick to box on the system and they don't have to worry about it?
Thank you. Yeah, good questions. Janet, are you okay with those?
In terms of antisocial behaviour, obviously, you know, half of our estates we no longer own. So often we find that there are properties that are being sold by the council through Threat-to-Buy and then they're private rented, and you know, sometimes that doesn't work particularly well. But one of the things that we do want to focus on is antisocial behaviour and tenancy breaches of our tenancies. And I think what I would like to see, this is just one of the tools, is if we can get this right, this should enable me to refocus our officers into, you know, that wider tenancy management, picking up those antisocial behaviour and tenancy breaches much earlier, and also to address some of the issues that particularly our repair service are seeing when they're entering properties, to both repair void properties and also to deal with, you know, quite complicated responsive repairs. So for me, this is about joining the whole things up, actually not spending considerable amounts of officer time where they're not needed, but actually focusing on the things that they are needed to do. I think it also will address that we can probably see sometimes from day one where we're going to have antisocial behaviour issues because lifestyle changes, you know, are not in keeping with maybe neighbours or things like that, and we might need to, we do now put interventions in, but I think for me I would like to see targeted interventions where they're needed, and sometimes that requires that intensive. So as we bring forward the allocations policy, we need to simplify that much better than it is at the moment. If we do that, then we should be able to move some resources from our housing team into dealing with helping to some of this intensive management. So it's actually, you know, for me, it's looking at all of the housing resources and looking at where we're best placing people, but also that support that we need to put in place to enable people to be successful. So I think, as you see from future committees, you know, we'll next time we'll be bringing the homeless prevention strategy. You know, we're then going to be bringing the allocations, and I think then what we'll be able to see that direction of travel for the service. and also for how we manage housing in the city. So I think that's right. The other things is around, you know, support services. You know, there is a good infrastructure in the city, particularly as well, we connect into the voluntary and community sectors. But also what we've been doing much more is individual tailoring, taking services to people, but also make sure that individuals are accessing other services in our communities. And, you know, we do have a pretty comprehensive voluntary and community service support services. It's not perfect in all areas by no means, but I do think that we have a reasonable infrastructure that probably we need to support more. And where there are gaps in that provision that is the conversation to have about where people can go to for additional support.
Thank you very much. I'm just conscious that, conscious of time, and I'm just wondering if people have got more burning things they want to ask. Well, you haven't come in yet, Ben. But just whether we're able to go to a vote on it so we can deal with some of the rest of the agenda. So just looking around the room, Ben, you indicated you did want to speak before. You've still got something. Shall we go to you then, and then before we embark on a second round, really?
Okay, thanks, Chair. I'll try and be brief, bearing in mind your comments. But yeah, with the report saying that this shouldn't affect 97% of tenants, I think we need to be mindful of the 3%, as Councillor Haby sort of highlighted. I would just want to echo that. But I think I don't want to say fear, that probably overplays it, but my concern, I guess, is that we're putting this forward as a plan in complete isolation of, or at least it feels like in complete isolation of the system. So how the system largely works is you have allocations. If allocations goes wrong, you have problems, and that's where tenancy support and things like that come in. And if they can't resolve the problems, then we rely on the introductory tenancies. And so to my mind, we should be viewing that system as a strategy rather than three separate parts, or actually tenancy supports more than one thing, so a whole bunch of separate parts. And I would feel more comfortable if we were talking about it in the round and having a concrete plan for the whole, from allocations to as things go wrong, introductory tenancy process at the end, rather than talking about this today, allocations and God knows when, because there's no date on the sheet, tenancy support at different points over the year because they're all different programmes. Really, it should be one thing, one strategy, one approach, how the council deals with its tenants in tenancies, in my mind. But as I said, we need to focus on not just the 3%, but the other people. And I can draw on my experience of having lived on a council estate for a while, of there being a notorious individual that probably shouldn't have been there. And the amount of times me and my neighbours found either car windows smashed because they thought that was fun, being interrupted in the night because someone came to their house to retaliate for something they'd done elsewhere, the amount of times there would be police around the estate, etc. We need to bear in mind those people, and for me, that's the benefit of introductory tenancies, is getting those people a resolution more quickly than we're often able to. And I guess for me is trying to understand a bit about actually what is that threshold of problem for that person that we will resolve, because certainly there's a level of violence and window smashing that's obvious, but a lot of the problems that we pick up are where you've got someone in their early 20s in a block of flats with people who are over 50 because it used to be an age-banded block. Is this going to pick up those issues where, in my mind, allocations has failed? Because it's just, if you ask your average Sheffielder, should someone at 21 be in a block with everyone that's over 50 and 60, you'd probably say that's probably not the best idea, but the council's now doing it regularly across the city. So what will that threshold be? And we've all got probably tenants who have complained about something that's a technical breach of their tenant, of a neighbour technically breaching their tenancy, that the council goes, yeah, we know, but that's okay. So where is that threshold? Is it going to make the material difference to people who aren't experiencing windows smashed and having fights outside, but are having their lives inconvenienced through lifestyle clashes or things like that. Yeah, this is me being brief, sorry. Yeah. And then just, sorry, my final point is just, I just need to say it, there's a bit of a fear that this is being seen as a bit of a panacea. We've heard today, we've heard to what works well elsewhere, we haven't heard what hasn't worked well elsewhere. We've talked about it freeing up officer time for all the other things that we want housing officers to do. We've even talked about this helping our housing repair service, which seems a bit of a stretch to my mind. So I'm supportive of it. I think we need to do it for those people who have to live with difficult situations around them and us to be able to sort them out. But we need to view it as a system, and it's a tool, it's not going to solve the housing repair service.
Thanks. Possibly more of a comment than a question, Ben. But yeah, Janet, is there something that you can add on to what's been said already?
Yeah, and I think it is, you know, and, you know, I can appreciate the reference to repair service, but, you know, we are, at my offices and the repairs officers are going into properties that have absolutely been destroyed by some tenants, and that is a huge cost, and that's completely in breach of tenancy conditions, because some individuals, you know, are not able to live in a property. They're not able to manage to be able to look after their home. So for me, it is all of those things. The majority of people with introductory tenancies obviously will have like no issues. They will straightly convert obviously into a secure tenancy. We can't see any issues. It will address people who don't look after their tenancies, and also it will help us in terms of bringing in place those checks and balances before people are allocated. But I think we also have to recognise that we have a significant shortage of affordable and social housing in this city, and we have a growing need of people where we have a housing duty to house them. So in the past, you know, where we would have had far more stock to be able to manage, then it was much easier to be able to try and match people appropriately on a more regular basis. We are seeing more people with specific needs that we need to deal with in our communities, and that is because as we've lost more and more properties, that's becoming much more issues. The allocations policy, obviously, you know, the vast majority of the allocations policy is absolutely fine. It's looking at people with need, it's looking at our housing duties, and the CBL process, you know, to be able to match people appropriately. But the CBL process in itself is a bidding process, and sometimes, you know, until those people are actually living in those properties, some of these issues don't emerge. And so this is where we know we will be bringing forward the allocations policy, but that is really around how we deal with priorities and also how we deal with matching of properties. But I think, you know, the procedures for this will take a little bit of time to put in place. That's what we want to work on now, so that when, you know, we have brought the allocations policy in here to this meeting, that we're all ready to go with a whole range of different changes, and they're all working together. And I think I would, you know, urge the committee to approve this now so we can put those arrangements in place, because I think, you know, both of them need to work together. I absolutely agree around the system of housing. You know, some of our big issues are also private rented, former right to buy properties on our estates that create significant issues. We've also, as a council, invested in quite a lot of community safety teams in many of our neighbourhoods, and also working closely with the police. You know, I have seen some horrific cases on our estates. You know, some of this will help us to actually try and address in some individual behaviours of a very small number of individuals that create a lot of work and a lot of issues for many services. And I think this would be a good thing to do. And I think, you know, also some of those individuals that can create lots of issues are people that are not necessarily vulnerable with complex needs. you know, there are other behaviours there at play. And I think this is a step to be able to be really clear on the standards that we expect for our tenants, but also be really clear on what we should be doing to manage our estates as well. And you know, those are two-way conversations, and I think this will enable us that. And we then also probably address some of the tenancy conditions that we've put in place and that were renewed a few years ago to make sure they're fit for purpose as well. So everybody's clear if they have a council property, what we expect of them, but also what we need to do to be able to support them as well.
Thanks, Janet. There's been a lot of detailed answer. I mean, are we ready to move to a vote on this first, and then we'll try and get through the rest of the agenda? Okay, so we're looking at the recommendation on page 50. It's a straightforward recommendation, which is to approve the adoption on operation of an introductory tenancies regime. So we'll just take a vote for and against. So can everyone to raise their hands if they're for the proposal? So that's 6, isn't it? Yeah. Those against, which include me, 2 against, and that's everyone accounted for. So that's clearly passed there. So that's good. You'll be relieved to know that, Janet. Okay, we've got that one, Rachel. Yep. Thank you very much. Right. Okay, let's move on to the rest of the agenda. So next one's the housing strategy task and finish group, and I'll just find the paper there. So on page 59. I'm hoping this will be a relatively quick item. This is something we've discussed in the briefings. So the formal decision here is to set up a task and finish group of a small number of us to work on the housing strategy in ways to be defined. So there's a simple recommendation on there on page 60. And I'm just wondering if we can incorporate the names of the people who are going to be on that task and finish group. But I'll just hand over first of all to Councillor Auckland.
Thank you. It's just, I believe it's been raised already and we haven't had an answer. This is through Penny Baker. But looking at the dates now that they're out, what we would like to do is to be in a position to have 2 people who could attend it to be an either-or basis, because obviously some of us have got other commitments outside the council and it's not always possible to attend on every occasion. So as far as we're concerned as a group, obviously Councillor Baker is able to attend, but Sophie Thornton and myself would like to attend when we can to fill that second space. So not both of us, but just one of us, and it's to be an either-or. And we haven't had a response to that. So I'm just raising it now.
Right, no, that's a good one. So today we're not formally being asked to slot the members in, so we could no doubt rotate that. I mean, I'm sure we won't have a problem in practice. So from that, we've got the dates, haven't we, in diaries? And are you saying from your point of view you can work around that between you?
Indeed, but we just want agreement that that's going to be possible, because as I said, yeah. Councillor Baker's made a formal inquiry about that and not had any response. So okay. I'm just checking it here, yeah. That providing one of us can attend, it is acceptable.
Let's make sure it's not a problem, and provided you two can talk to each other so that you know what happened at the last meeting, that should be fine, shouldn't it? So the proposal for the membership is on page 65 on the bottom paragraph. So it'll be Chair, Deputy Chair is Councillor Baker, Group Spokesperson who's Councillor Belbin, and then presumably so one more from the Lib Dem group, which will be one of you two, Councillor Thornton, Councillor Auckland, and then one of you three, and I don't know if you've got, so yes, of course, Councillor Fox for definite. So actually we've got the membership of the group there, haven't we? Right, shall we just vote formally on the proposal then, which is really to set it up? Which I've now lost. What page was that on? Anyone? It was on page 60, is the recommendation. Should I just take a vote on that? Are we happy to approve that? Nods all round. Okay, so that item is passed. Resolved unanimously, yeah. Okay, great, thank you. That's a much quicker item. Okay, so the next item is going on to the, right, we're going now on to the finances stuff. So this is where we have to disturb Ryan from an hour and a half of hard work on other stuff. So we're going on to item 14 now, which is the Revenue Budget Monitoring Report. So this is open to the public. I think it's really for information and then any immediate questions that councillors have here. I think I'm just going to ask Ryan to introduce and summarise it, and we'll go from there. Ryan, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. My name is Ryan Keyworth. I'm the Council's Director of Finance and Commercial Services. Yeah, so the first of the finance reports today is the Budget Monitoring Report. And as the Chair said, this is essentially for noting and obviously for me to answer any questions that members have on the Council's finances and this committee specifically. You'll see from the report that the Council is reporting at the end of month 6 an £18.6 million overspend, a slight improvement on the previous month, but nonetheless still a fairly significant overspend. Much of the report repeats essentially discussions that we've had at this committee. That's the nature of a year-to-date report, and the fundamental reasons for the overspend, both for the Council and in fact for this committee, have remained fairly consistent throughout the last few months. Just briefly and specifically for this committee, the issues that the committee is facing in terms of its budget relate to income, lower than expected income, and compounded in fact by the cost of catching up on repairs and other costs associated with the vacant properties, such as disrepair claims, council tax costs, and so on. In the month, there's been relatively little movement, so the movement from month 5 to 6 is minimal, to be quite honest. So that's really all I want to say by means of introduction, Chair. Again, as I said, the reasons are very similar to the discussions we've had here previously, and I know the actions are underway in the services to try and bring them back about. Happy to take questions.
Thank you indeed. Yes, I know that the officers are working hard and really focusing on this. Is it information to note? Anyone got any questions? I think we know what they are and the report says what it says. So if that's for context, shall we just formally agree to note that, which is the recommendation on page 69, simply to note the Council's financial position at the end of September. Everyone happy with that? Yep, nods all round. We'll take that as resolved. So we'll go straight on to the capital item, which is, sorry, let me just check. Yeah, item 15. So the Capital Finance Monitoring Report, and that's in the second pack of papers that you have. Again, the full report is open to the public and is presumably available on the website, so it's there for everyone to read. Who's going to go? Dean, you're going to do that one. Thank you very much. Over to you, Dean.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just for everybody's knowledge, I'm Dean Butterworth. I'm the Council's Housing Head of Investments and Maintenance. The report is for information, and it's a 6-month update on the 5-year capital programme that was approved in February of this year. Just in terms of the background behind it, the programme itself was developed as a fabric-first programme that was making sure that we had a balanced programme around maintaining the investment in our existing stock, but also making sure that we got an appropriate stock improvement programme to make sure we're responding to the Council's challenge of the right to buy, making sure that we're allocating sufficient resources to making sure we're providing replacement properties for the properties that we're losing through that programme. The report itself shows that there is a slippage at the moment of around about £7 million on the programme, but the report again details very clearly the reasons for each of those slippages across the main spend areas within the capital programme. So, really, Chair, it is just asking for approval of the report and for questions.
Thank you very much, and I'm sure that you'll be able to take any questions if there are any, but no one's indicating because it's there, and as before, the report says what it says, doesn't it? It's clearly laid out as to what's happening. Big room work underway. We have got a question. Councillor Belbin.
Can I just note that it came very late, this paper, and we didn't really get much chance to engage with it. And we've not had a briefing around the capital programme as well, so it's quite difficult to pick out any questions in it, to be honest.
That is a fair comment. It did come late, and we may need to pick this up in briefings. So it may be that actually if we do have any subsequent questions on this, that we could arrange a session at one of the housing briefings. Yeah, that's probably fair comment. Anyone's got any questions on this, or are we happy just to note it as recommended on page 30 of the second pack? Right, we're happy noting it? Yeah, nods all round. Let's treat that as resolved. Yeah, unanimously. Okay, so that's line 15. And we now need to deal with the last two items, which are items 9 and 10 on the agenda. So these are the ones that do have closed appendices. But as I said before, the main bit of the report is open to the public, is available. So we don't need to close the topic now. I think we're suggesting, Ryan, that you will go through what you need to say on both of those reports together, really. One's the general fund, one's the housing revenue account, so it makes sense to take them together. And then we can perhaps decide if we actually need to close the meeting, which will depend on what questions people want to ask. But shall I go over to you, Ryan, first of all, to take us through the papers, first of all? Thanks.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I think that the hope is here that we can deal with most of the issues in open session as far as we're able. I think it's only if members have questions that require reference to the detail in the closed appendix that we need to think about doing that. But we'll try and keep it as open as we can. So what you've got here are two reports reflecting the two different facets of this committee's budgeting: the general fund, which is obviously the smaller part, and the housing revenue account, which is the more significant part. But just very briefly on the council's overall budget position and where we're at in terms of 2023-24's budget. The Strategy and Resources Committee received a consolidated report on the 12th of October, which brought together the work that was done in individual policy committees, including this one, and reported to those individual policy committees in September. At that time, savings were noted by the various committees on the general fund, totaling about 60 million against a requirement at that point of about 80. So some significant and really good work done by committees right across the organisation. Work has been in progress throughout that time and still carries on really with members to essentially ensure that as many of those savings as possible are frankly politically acceptable. So the committees noted the savings. There was no approval of them back in September. And we've been working with members in the background to understand the political acceptability across the three parties of those savings. That work goes on. The Strategy and Resources Committee will receive a further report on the 5th of December, which will essentially bring the results of that work back together and make as much of it public as we are able to. The only reason we will withhold something at that stage from the public domain is if consultations with staff and trade unions who are directly affected by the savings, or any statutory consultations that need to take place before something is made public. If that's not been completed, then obviously we can't do it, but if at all possible, we will. I'll say this to the committee: there is a chance the committee won't get to see another set of savings before it goes to that Strategy and Resources meeting. We might well run out of time. Constitutionally, that's fine. It's actually Strategy and Resources that recommends a budget, both the housing revenue account budget and the general fund budget. Strategy and Resources recommends that budget to full council. What we've tried to do is involve and engage the policy committees as much as possible throughout this budget process. So, on the general fund, there is a list of savings which, take a step back. What we've tried to do in this report is ask members to endorse a list of savings that are politically acceptable to all three groups. So broad political support for the savings that are proposed. That's why the list of savings in the confidential appendix is there. We've taken a decision this time to keep all those savings confidential, basically to avoid an inadvertent release of information to people who need to be consulted properly via trade unions and so on. So we've taken a fail-safe approach, I suppose, to that information. So on the general fund side, there's a short list of savings that is politically acceptable to all three groups. And on the housing revenue account side, there's a similar list of savings that is that we've had agreement from all three groups as being politically acceptable. There's a lot of work to do in the background on the remaining savings. So the savings list that members have in front of them doesn't in any way equal the challenge that's before this committee in terms of balancing its budget, but work continues in the background to effectively make more of those, to try and make more of those savings that were identified earlier politically acceptable, or to find alternatives where we're unable to find savings that work for all three groups. Chair, I think that's all I really want to say on the general fund paper. I don't know if Janet wants to add anything specific to the housing revenue account. Or if not, we'll take questions.
Janet, anything from you?
No, I think Ryan's covered it in terms of huge amount of work has taken place to obviously bring forward proposals that could achieve the savings for this committee, both in terms of Housing General Fund and obviously the Housing Revenue Account. Working really closely with yourselves. I think some of the detail you may well want to discuss in as part of the closed appendices. But I think, you know, there is huge amounts of work that can get us to a balanced position that will come forward, you know, for approval at the appropriate time. And I think Ryan has covered the detail and the position for the committee.
Thank you. Just a couple of remarks, really. I mean, first of all, just appreciate the huge amount of work that's gone in from officers who are having to deal with some fairly grim stuff, and also actually credit to the councillors who've attended the housing briefings, where we've discussed informally the issues facing us and trying to help shape those proposals. I think it's fair to say that the confidential appendices here basically include a small number of savings that are not politically contentious. And whilst we don't necessarily need to go into those, we certainly won't go to an open session for the reasons that Ryan's outlined. We know that we have discussed those in informal briefings, and they are where we are. We're also conscious that there's still a lot of work to do. And I just wanted to remark on the points that Brian's used the word in the report, that we're being asked to endorse these savings, which is a kind of halfway word between notes, and which we had at the last committee, and approves, which actually this committee isn't going to be asked to do. So just in case anyone wasn't aware of this, we're at the stage now where the budget issues are moving out of the policy committees and being handed to Strategy and Resources Committee to bring the whole thing together based on all the work that's been done by us and all the other policy committees right across the board. So I think the implication of endorse is that we're agreeing the ones that we know that we've already all agreed informally, but we're not yet saying anything about the more difficult budget issues that are still being worked through. So I suppose I'm going to ask if there's any questions on anything that's in the open report, either in the written text or what Ryan's asked, when we're still in open session now, or if there's anything we need to ask that needs to be done in closed session. And I'm actually anticipating, no one's indicating, I'm anticipating we don't have any questions about the closed stuff, and therefore we hopefully don't need to close the meeting. Have we got any questions at all? We don't need to have. Again, we have what we have in front of us. We have one question. Over to you, Fran.
Again, it's a comment rather than a question. I think we just need to be clear about that by saying things aren't contentious doesn't mean that these aren't some really difficult decisions, and some of the things that we are endorsing by endorsing this are not things that we would by choice have wanted to do. And to say they're not contentious is not to say they're easy. That's all.
Absolutely a fair point that I wish I'd made, because I did make it the other day. I think, Ryan, you'll know that we're all dealing with cuts that actually none of us want to make. There are very few genuine efficiency savings to make now, but yeah, these are the ones that, frankly, you know, we're not kicking off about, as opposed to the ones where actually we are kicking off about. So that's where we are. It's an absolutely fair point, Fran. Have we anything else on this? Because if not, then I think we could just formally endorse the two things. So we've got, for item 9, we've got the recommendation on the first page of the second pack, and that's that we're being recommended to note the update that's been given here and endorse the budget proposals that are set out in the closed part. I'm getting nods all round. I'm happy to say that's resolved, so that's resolved unanimously. Thank you very much. And very similarly, item 10 is page 11 on the supplementary pack. Actually, the recommendation is on page 12. So a similar sort of thing. The recommendation is that we endorse the housing revenue account savings as set out in this report, and then recommends to the Strategy and Resources Committee that they be approved. And importantly for this committee, we request a further report on the HRA business plan at the February meeting, and that's what will come naturally as part of the rent setting exercise, with details of the full capital and revenue expenditure proposals for the next financial year, and that of course will be fully open and public. And thirdly, being asked to acknowledge that the final decision on council housing rents will be taken at the full council in February, once the outcome of the government consultation on the rent standard is known. So that's what we're being asked to approve. Again, I'm getting nods around. I'm happy to take that as approved. Is that approved, Sophie, your question?
Just looking at, obviously, we've got lots of different rent setting scenarios and the rent consultation on the rent standard. This question probably would have been better in an earlier item of business, to be fair, but I just wanted to ask around the rent setting scenarios, and whether you know this offhand or not is, I'm happy to receive an answer at a later date. But when looking at the rent setting scenarios, have we given consideration to how this might affect those currently affected by the benefits cap? Or if for example, if you're on housing benefit, or if an increase in rent at any stage would then push someone over the benefit cap?
Good question. Up to answer, Janet.
Yeah, absolutely. We know an awful lot about our tenancies, and obviously we've had for many years a successful track record of looking at people in extreme hardship and how we work with those individuals. And I think when you see obviously the reports on the amount of rent that we do collect, that I think that demonstrates that we're providing that financial inclusion and that financial support. One thing we're also doing is triaging other support that is available both by the council and by other agencies. So we're already in regular communication with tenants, whether they are on full benefits or whether they're just below the line on working on 0 hours contracts, or other, others where their income is quite piecemeal, in and out of work, which unfortunately affects far too many people in the city. So one of the things that we are doing is we are clear with the income management unit team, is working closely with those individuals. One of the things that we are wanting to bring forward is probably putting additional provision for additional supporting, given lots of people are facing like the cost of living, and we know that is affecting people. So one of the things that we are doing is make sure we have got staff in place to be able to support individuals, and also a mechanism to triage lots of other additional support that is available for our tenants. Obviously as well, what we have got is we are expecting to see more people being made homeless, unless other additional support is provided. So we're also looking at quite vulnerable households that are living in the private sector as well. And some of that work with Ryan's teams and other teams, it's about us joining the dots in the council and making sure we are triaging support and making the best use of additional external funding there is out there, from the utilities, from the water companies, from government, other government funding sources. So we're making the best use of that additional support, collectively, and also how that affects and can support tenants, but also how it can affect other households in the city as well. One of the things we do need to make sure is that we are taking a preventative approach. We do not want to see lots of people losing their home over the coming year as a result of cost of living. So it's what support we need to put in place to prevent that.
Thank you very much. Yeah, good question. Okay. Any other questions to that, or are we happy just to deal with the recommendation, it said on page 12? We're getting nods all round, so can I just ask that's formally approved? Yes, I think that's another unanimous, isn't it? So, thank you very much for that. That is all the items, isn't it? Yes, that's all the items on the agenda. We have got to the end of the meeting. Thanks very much for that, both for all the work in bearing with, you know, the difficult budget issues, you know, this both to the officers as well as members, especially the officers been working really hard on it. And just say thanks to people in the room for the debate on the introductory tenancies, which went through very calmly with some, you know, good comments there. See you all next time. I think we can close the meeting. Thank you.